President Trump putting his stamp on the federal government with unprecedented speed. And just 6 days in, he's already taking a victory lap with his first post-inauguration rally in Las Vegas.
I declared a national emergency at our southern border. Under our leadership, America is back open for business. I pardoned hundreds of political prisoners who had been viciously persecuted. We are now in a merit-based world.
Trump has two more members of his cabinet in place tonight. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, whose nomination once seemed on life support, was sworn in today after a 50-50 Senate vote. Vice President J.D. Vance stepped in to break the tie. And in an overnight move that seems to have caught much of Washington by surprise, the president fired the inspectors general, the title for top in-house watchdogs, from a number of federal agencies.
All right, guys, Adam is here, so this is happening right now. A new investigation into Trump's use of federal power to protect himself and punish critics is gaining momentum, with serious talk of 25th Amendment removal as a pattern of abuse emerges. The question is whether institutions can still check a president who openly works to dismantle oversight and place himself above the law. It's not theoretical anymore. It's not just something that constitutional scholars debate in fancy think tanks and universities. It's not hypothetical. It's real. Federal judges are already ordering him to do things against his will. Federal judges are telling him his actions are illegal and unconstitutional. Legal experts are saying his mass firing of inspectors general probably violated federal law and constitutional protections. They're saying his actions might not be legal. And there's real pushback happening from institutions, real pushback from courts, real pushback from Congress, real pushback from people inside his own government who are concerned about what he's doing and whether it's even legal or constitutional.
And you know all those layoffs we've been talking about? These federal workers getting fired permanently since Friday during the shutdown? Setback now on that for the Trump administration, because in just the last few hours, a federal judge has stopped those firings for now, saying they are not legal. So that's where things stand as of tonight, as of Wednesday night. That's after, remember, a couple of unions sued last month over that so-called RIF plan. RIFs, that's D.C. speak for reductions in force. So this judge now says the Trump administration has taken advantage of the lapse in government spending and government functioning to assume that all bets are off. And that judge has now temporarily pressed pause. Julie Sirkin is joining us now. Key words here, Julie, temporary for now, because this is not permanent, presumably, and I don't know that we have any filings on this, the Trump administration will push back. It is their goal to implement some of these permanent firings during this shutdown, not a furlough where people don't go to work, they don't get paid, but they don't lose their jobs. This is something different altogether.
So let's start with what he actually did and why it matters. In January of this year, Trump summarily fired at least a dozen inspectors general across key federal agencies without warning. We're talking about the Defense Department, the State Department, the Transportation Department, Health and Human Services, the Environmental Protection Agency, and more. Just fired them. Gone. No notice, no explanation, no opportunity to be heard, no 30-day warning like federal law actually requires them to give. And that's the problem here. There's a law, a specific federal law passed in 2022. That law says if you're going to fire an inspector general, you have to give Congress 30 days notice. You have to explain your reasons. You can't just do it on a whim. You can't just wake up one day and decide to fire all the independent watchdogs because you don't like them. But Trump did exactly that. He fired them all. No notice, no procedure, no explanation.
Up to 50,000 career federal employees were set to lose job protections after the Trump administration announced an overhaul of the government's civil service system on Thursday. The changes, released by the Office of Personnel Management, or OPM, will give President Donald Trump the ability to make decisions on hiring and firing, fulfilling one of his campaign pledges.
There are thousands of people who work for the federal government here in Washington, D.C.
Caroline Leavitt on Thursday called the changes a good thing.
I think if people aren't doing their jobs, if they aren't showing up for work, if they're not working hard on behalf of this president, they're not welcome to work for him at all.
It is the biggest change to the rules governing the civil service in more than a century and targets employees whom the administration sees as undermining the president's priorities. Federal worker unions and their allies sued in January to stop the policy before it was fully developed. Federal judges paused the litigation while the Trump administration finalized changes. One of the groups behind the lawsuit said a court challenge will resume in the coming days.
And legal experts are saying this probably isn't legal. This probably violates federal law and constitutional protections. This is likely unconstitutional. And the reason this matters so much is because inspectors general are supposed to be independent. They're supposed to be protected from political interference. Their actual job is to investigate corruption in their agencies. They're supposed to investigate fraud. They're supposed to investigate waste. They're supposed to investigate abuse of power. They're the watchdogs. They're supposed to bark loudly if something is wrong. But if Trump can just fire them whenever he wants, if he can remove anybody who might investigate him or his administration or his agencies, then what's the point of having inspectors general at all? What's the point of having independent oversight mechanisms? There's no independence anymore. There's no real check on power. There's just Trump doing whatever he wants and nobody can stop him. And people are starting to realize this. Judges are starting to realize this.
President Donald Trump is making a lot of executive changes in his first 100 days in office. That includes firing at least 15 inspectors general. Those are the independent government watchdogs meant to root out waste, fraud, and abuse. Weijia Zhang shows us the controversy over that decision.
Mark Lee Greenblatt served as the Inspector General for the Department of Interior until late Friday night, when President Trump fired him, along with more than a dozen other IGs.
This is absolutely unprecedented. There is nothing that's ever happened remotely like this.
Greenblatt, who Trump appointed during his first term, worries about who could replace him. IGs are meant to be nonpartisan watchdogs who root out corruption and fraud.
The key is that our reports have credibility because we're independent. If all of a sudden, if you remove that independence, so what value does that report have?
California Senator Adam Schiff says Trump broke the law because he did not give Congress the required 30-day notice.
The American people, if we don't have good and independent inspector generals, are going to see the swamp refill.
Legal experts are saying this violates the law and could be challenged in court and might result in his removal from office. So, we've got a situation where Trump is breaking the law to remove the people who would investigate him for breaking the law. It's circular, it's corrupt, it's systematic, and it's serious. But that's not all that's happening. There's also the major issue of how Trump is using the Justice Department, the federal law enforcement agency, the federal prosecutors, the FBI. He's been pressuring them to go after his political enemies. We're talking about investigations into Gavin Newsom, the California governor, investigations into people who have criticized him, people who have opposed him politically. He's using federal law enforcement as a weapon against his enemies and critics. He's using government power for personal political purposes, and that's abuse of power. That's the definition of authoritarian rule. That's what autocrats and dictators do. They use government to punish their enemies and reward their friends. They use law enforcement as a political weapon. And Trump is doing it openly. He's not even hiding it anymore. He's not being subtle. And now courts are starting to push back in major ways. A federal judge recently ordered Trump to remove his name from the Kennedy Center. Not because the Kennedy Center is a huge deal in the scheme of things, but because the judge said the naming deal was illegal. It violated federal rules about naming federal buildings. The Trump administration didn't follow proper procedures. It was done improperly and illegally. So the judge ordered his name removed within 14 days. And Trump's lawyers are appealing it. They're fighting it in court, but the point is crystal clear. Courts are saying, no, you can't do this. There are rules. There are laws. You can't just do whatever you want because you're the president. And here's where the removal talk comes in, because people are remembering something very important, something from the past, something that was quietly discussed inside the Trump administration years ago when concerns about his presidency were at their height. Senior officials, DOJ lawyers, FBI officials, legal experts, they all had serious conversations about using the 25th Amendment to remove Trump from office. And these weren't casual conversations. These weren't joking around, not after he lost an election. Not after he incited a riot, just during his regular presidency when people were genuinely concerned because they were so concerned about his behavior and his abuse of power and his attacks on the rule of law and the Constitution that they thought removal was a real option that needed to be seriously considered and discussed. Those conversations actually happened. They're documented. They're in the official record. Congress heard about them. FBI General Counsel James Baker told Congress about these discussions under oath. Lawyer Sally Moyer told Congress about them under oath. Former Rosenstein discussed it. These aren't rumors or speculation or conspiracy theories. These are documented facts from the historical record. And now with this new abuse of power investigation happening, with this clear pattern of removing watchdogs and pressuring law enforcement for political purposes, those conversations are coming back into the news cycle. People are talking about it again. People are seriously considering it. Is removal back on the table? Is this serious enough that we need to consider that constitutional option? Are we at a point where the institutions of government need to take that step? Okay, so let's break down what's actually happening here beneath the surface because there's a lot of moving parts and you need to understand the full picture of what's occurring. Trump has been working systematically and methodically and deliberately to insulate himself from being investigated. That's what multiple news reports are saying. That's what legal experts are saying. That's what courts are starting to say. He's been working to protect himself. He's been using his power as president to make sure that nobody can investigate him. He's been doing this in several strategic ways. First, he's removing the watchdogs, the inspectors general, the people whose actual job is to investigate him and his administration and federal agencies. He fired them all without proper notice or proper procedure or proper legal justification. And when people said this was illegal and violated federal law, he didn't back down and apologize. He doubled down. His lawyers appealed the court decision. He's fighting to keep them removed and fighting the legal challenges. So step 1 in his strategy is removing the people who might investigate you. Step 2 is controlling the Justice Department, the federal law enforcement agency, the prosecutors, the FBI. Trump has been pressuring the DOJ to go after his political enemies, to investigate people like Gavin Newsom, to target critics and opponents, to use federal law enforcement as a weapon against his opponents and enemies instead of pursuing actual justice. And the Justice Department has been following these orders and directives from the president. This is corruption. This is abuse of power. This is using government to serve personal political purposes instead of serving justice and the rule of law and the Constitution. Step 3 in his strategy is getting the Supreme Court to help him remove checks on his power. Trump has a friendly majority on the Supreme Court, conservative justices who are sympathetic to executive power and presidential authority, and he's been getting them to make rulings that let him remove people from independent agencies without cause. So even if Congress tries to protect someone by passing a law that says this person can't be removed without cause, the Supreme Court says no, the president can remove them anyway. The president has that power according to the Constitution as they interpret it. So Trump is systematically removing every check on his power, every institution that might investigate him, every person who might stand in his way, and he's using courts to do it. He's using legal arguments. He's using sympathetic judges and justices. But the end result is the same. He's placing himself above the law. He's making himself immune to investigation. He's creating a system where he can't be checked anymore. And people are realizing this across the political spectrum. Legal experts are saying this is unprecedented in American history. This is dangerous. This is a threat to democracy and the rule of law and the Constitution. Judges are pushing back. A federal judge ordered his name removed from the Kennedy Center as an act of defiance against his illegal actions. Other judges are likely to challenge his firings of inspectors general and his purges of independent agency heads. Congress is starting to pay attention and wake up. There are calls for investigations into his abuse of power. There are calls for accountability. There are calls for legal action. And all of this is bringing back the conversation about removal, the 25th Amendment, whether there's a legal mechanism to remove a president who's abusing power so egregiously and blatantly that he's threatening the fundamental institutions of government and the rule of law itself. Now, let's talk about what removal would actually mean and how it would work. The 25th Amendment is a constitutional amendment that was passed in 1967 after JFK was assassinated. It deals with presidential succession and what happens if a president dies or becomes incapacitated. But there's a relevant section that deals with removal for incapacity. It requires a supermajority. It requires that the vice president and at least 8 members of the cabinet agree that the president is unable to discharge his duties, or it requires a 2/3 vote in both houses of Congress. So, it's not easy. It's not something that happens lightly or easily. It's designed to be difficult, so it's not used frivolously. But there have been serious discussions among legal scholars and government officials about whether it could apply to Trump. Whether his pattern of abuse of power and his attacks on the rule of law and his attempts to dismantle independent oversight and his use of government as a weapon makes him unfit to serve as president. And those conversations actually happened inside the Department of Justice, inside the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Serious government officials had serious conversations about whether the 25th Amendment was a viable and necessary option to remove Trump from office. Those conversations are documented in the historical record. Congress heard about them, legal professionals testified about them, and now with this new abuse of power investigation, with courts pushing back, with legal experts raising the alarm, those conversations could happen again. But here's the thing that's really important to understand about what's happening. This isn't just about legal mechanisms and constitutional procedures. This is about the fact that Trump is openly, brazenly, systematically working to place himself above the law and beyond the reach of investigation. He's firing inspectors general without proper procedure and without legal justification. He's using the DOJ as a weapon against his enemies. He's getting the Supreme Court to rule in his favor on expansions of executive power. He's controlling every institution that might check his power. And he's doing all of this while being under investigation for abuse of power. So it's not like he's denying the accusations or defending himself in a normal way. It's not like he's trying to prove his innocence. He's just making sure that nobody can investigate him. He's making sure that nobody can hold him accountable. He's making the investigation impossible to conduct by removing all the people who would lead it. And that's when people start thinking seriously about removal as the only remaining option. Because what else is there? What alternatives are left? If you can't investigate him because all the investigators are fired, if you can't prosecute him because he controls the Justice Department and can pardon anyone, if he controls every institution, if he can fire anybody who might stand in his way, then what power does Congress have left to check him? What power does the court system have? What mechanism is there to hold him accountable? What's left in the constitutional toolkit? And the only option remaining is removal. The 25th Amendment, congressional action, and impeachment. Some mechanism to say this has gone too far. This president is unfit for office. This president is a threat to the rule of law and democratic institutions and the Constitution itself. This is the conversation happening right now. Let me break this down into what's really happening and why it matters so much right now in this moment. First, the most important thing to understand is that Trump is not denying that he fired the inspectors general. He's not denying that he's using the DOJ to go after his enemies. He's not denying any of the key facts about what he's doing. He's just saying he has the power to do it. He's saying that as president, he has the constitutional authority to remove inspectors general whenever he wants. He can pressure the DOJ whenever he wants. He can do whatever he wants because he's the president and presidential power is broad, and the courts are going to have to decide whether that's actually true, whether presidential power is really that broad and unlimited, whether a president can really fire all the watchdogs and insulate himself from investigation and use government as a weapon. There are serious legal arguments on both sides. But the fact that this is even a question, the fact that we're even debating this, the fact that legal scholars are saying removal might be necessary shows how far things have deteriorated and how serious the situation is. The second critical thing is that this pattern of behavior is what historically precedes dictatorship and authoritarian rule. When authoritarian leaders and dictators take over, the first thing they do is remove the independent institutions. They remove the watchdogs. They remove the people who can investigate them. They control the courts. They control law enforcement. They make sure that nobody can investigate them or hold them accountable. And then they're free to do whatever they want. They're free to consolidate power and make it permanent. They're free to silence critics. They're free to rewrite the rules to benefit themselves. And Trump is following that exact playbook. He's firing inspectors general. He's controlling the DOJ. He's getting the Supreme Court to rule in his favor. He's systematically removing every check on his power and every institution that might constrain him. And the fact that he's doing this openly, the fact that he's not hiding it or being subtle, shows how confident he is that he can get away with it. Third point is that courts are still pushing back, but it's unclear whether it will be enough to stop him. A judge ordered his name removed from the Kennedy Center. That's good. That shows that courts are still willing to say no to the president. That shows that judicial independence still exists, but it's a small thing. It's about a naming deal. It's not about the fundamental abuse of power. It's not about whether he can illegally fire inspectors general. It's not about whether he can use the DOJ as a weapon against his enemies. So, courts are pushing back on the margins and on small issues, but they're not addressing the core issues. They're not checking the fundamental power grab. And if courts can't check him because he controls the Justice Department and the appeals process, if Congress is controlled by his party, if he controls the DOJ and all the inspectors general are gone, then what's left? What institutions are there to hold him accountable? What mechanisms exist? And that's when people start thinking about removal as the only option. Fourth point is that the 25th Amendment conversations are real and documented. This isn't conspiracy theory. This isn't speculation. This isn't made up. Senior DOJ officials, FBI lawyers, congressional representatives, they all heard about and testified about the fact that serious government officials had serious conversations about whether the 25th Amendment could be used to remove Trump. Those conversations happened. They're in the historical record. They're documented. And now with this new abuse of power investigation, with this pattern of removing watchdogs and pressuring the DOJ, with courts pushing back, those conversations could happen again. Not because people are trying to stage a coup or overthrow the government in some kind of illegal way, but because they're genuinely concerned that Trump is placing himself above the law and that there might be a constitutional mechanism to address that serious concern. Fifth point is that this is all happening while the country is dealing with other serious crises and problems. The Iran situation and Middle East tensions, the inflation crisis affecting families, the cultural wars and social division. Congress has a million things it needs to do to help the American people, but instead is spending time and energy dealing with the president who is systematically trying to insulate himself from investigation. A president who is abusing power. A president who is removing the institutions that would check his power. And that takes time and energy and political capital that distracts from everything else. And that's part of the strategy, whether intentional or not. By creating chaos and scandal and controversy, Trump forces Congress and the media and the public to focus on him instead of on other issues. It's a distraction technique. It's a way to keep people off balance and unable to focus on anything else. So, what does this all mean? What's the bottom line here? What should people be paying attention to? The bottom line is that we have a president who is openly abusing power in very serious and documented ways that are hard to deny or explain away. We have a president who is removing the watchdogs and investigators who would look into his conduct. We have a president who is using federal law enforcement and the Justice Department as a weapon against his political enemies instead of pursuing actual justice. We have a president who is systematically trying to place himself above the law and beyond accountability and beyond the reach of any investigation. He's making himself immune to the normal checks on presidential power, and institutions are pushing back in response to these actions. Courts are pushing back. Congress is starting to pay attention and wake up to what's happening. Legal experts are raising the alarm and saying this violates the law and the Constitution, and the conversation about removal is coming back into mainstream discussion and serious consideration. Not as a certainty, not as something that's about to happen tomorrow, but as a real possibility, as something that serious people are seriously thinking about and considering. Because if a president can't be checked by courts, if he can't be checked by Congress, if he can't be checked by law enforcement because he controls law enforcement, then what power is left? What mechanism is there to hold him accountable? What can actually stop him from consolidating power? And the answer is removal. The 25th Amendment, congressional action, some constitutional mechanism to say this has gone too far. This president is unfit for office. This president is a threat to the Constitution. Now, will removal actually happen? That's a different question entirely. It's politically difficult. It's constitutionally complex. It requires supermajority support from Congress, or from the cabinet, and the vice president. So, the odds of it actually happening are low right now. But the fact that it's being discussed seriously, the fact that legal experts are saying it might be necessary, the fact that courts are pushing back, the fact that inspectors general are filing lawsuits challenging their illegal removal, all of that shows that there are still institutions and people willing to check Trump's power. There are still people willing to say no. There are still mechanisms that can constrain him and keep him from consolidating absolute power. So while removal might not happen, the threat of it, the possibility of it, the seriousness of the discussion might actually be enough to constrain his behavior and make him think twice about his most egregious power grabs. Make sure you're subscribed because this is going to keep developing and changing. This story is far from over.